Hey everyone, good evening. I hope you're all doing really well. I thought we'd just hop into it tonight, just hop into talking a little bit about MK Ultra. I do get a lot of comments about that on the Alyssa video, and people are always asking about my own personal experience. Here's who I always see as the poster child of MK Ultra, who's Malcolm McDowell, right, in Clockwork Orange and in Oh Lucky Man, a sort of lesser known film, but absolutely, marvelous in really just showing the bare facts of mind control, where you kind of end up like that. And I'm just going to go with it. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying I'm wrong. I'm just talking about my own little experience here. And if anyone else has had anything similar, if it can help you in any way, that's great. So this was a book that I was subjected to in childhood. I had a lot of fabulous books that I really loved, amazing, really from all over the world, and some I've totally hung on to, that are just great. But this was one that was despised by me in a very intense way, and I always felt that there was a split that was occurring within me whenever I would read it. And maybe I was forced to read it when I was bad, I'm not sure. But it was really talking about how you always had to be the great me. You always had to be happy. You never could be sad. And it was a split. It wasn't looking at a whole person saying, you are Ben, and sometimes Ben is happy and sometimes Ben is mad, but Ben is always Ben. So this was a very disturbing book, and there was a lot of repetition in it. I was forced to read it again and again and again, and it was really simplistic. Even for a 7-year-old, it had no attractive art. There was nothing to focus on it that was attractive, like, oh, I hate the book but I like the pictures, or oh, I hate the pictures but I like the lettering, or the colors. But everything about it was this painful splitting pow, and it was a complete invalidation and denial of any real and true way to deal with anything in the world. Because if you were tired, if you were sick, if you were not feeling well, then you were relegated to, you are being the little me, and this is you, and this is what you will become. And later in life, it was discovered that I had a disability. And when I look back in life, there were times when I was in a huge amount of pain, and instead of really seeing why are you in pain, or you're only 7 years old, maybe you're crying because you're tired, something like this, it was you are manifesting the little me, and this is what you will become, and everyone will hate you when you grow up. So there was this real threat and this real fear of showing, see a tear, of showing anything negative. But what if one is, faced with the negative, right? Like, what if this child's seeing a monster? You're seeing a monster, but you're supposed to be like this. So it puts you in a difficult bind later in life, and at the time too, because you can't have a true emotion to anything. And I do find that with myself, and I can't watch court shows at all or shows about psychology because they'll say, we know that man's guilty, he wasn't crying, or we know he's guilty, he was overacting, or he was hysterical, or whatever. And, usually with these cases with DNA, they find out years later that everyone was wrong about the human behavior of a person correlating to their innocence, their guilt, or how they feel about anything at all. So there was this forced, really, diminishment of anything I felt within me that was negative, or anything that happened to me that was negative, because you don't want to be this, this is like horrible. And so whenever I was like bad, or they were not happy with me, and usually, in looking back on it now, a lot of those times it was because I was feeling internal pain. I've got kind of an internal bleeding condition. So that was a lot of the time when I was really upset as a child, was feeling that kind of pain. So for me, it was a split. Maybe it wasn't written about that. Maybe it was written about have a good attitude about life, don't be sour, or something like that. But the way that it was utilized for me, and I guess I can say us, for those of us who were subjected to it at that time, it was problematic. It was like the little kiddo version, and there was a forced reading of it. It was a little kiddo version of The Clockwork Orange. And at this time, there was a lot of time spent at Unity Village, at these very pristine and perfect places. In fact, and here are some pictures I did find of Unity back in the 60s. I don't know if they still have this sort of part going on anymore. They used to make like cherry jam, things like that. Here's their Masonic tower. Excuse me. We've got Ram Dass coming through. There was sort of a bit of a pit stop for that. And we were living at the time in La Crescenta near LA. And I found finally some little Disney footage from that time. This was kind of from 1965, from that same year. So that book came around the same time, maybe just a little bit later, but we spent a huge amount of time at Disneyland. I really, excuse me, I'm sorry, my throat's dry, really almost felt like I kind of lived there. And, a lot of people that have studied Disney over the years really do feel, maybe I'm getting out there. I don't know. Maybe it's getting late. But, why not just sort of spill the beans that it was a place utilized for programming, that the military, which, a great deal of California is military, a lot of the West is, was using children for experimentation. Mind control and splitting is always done best at a young age when you have an innocent to work with. You have a whole personality that's innocent that you can then split, and what's in that personality. If you have someone older, you don't know what their barriers are and things. There also has to be a certain degree of intelligence, because someone has to be smart enough to be able to process what it is that's happening to them, and not just be confused. So there's a lot going on with that. I felt like that was kind of creepy, didn't you, about that nose with the pig? Is it just me? Have I been around too much? Have I seen too much But it's weird, and there's a part later where they're like making the kid pet the nose and stuff. It's kind of weird, just after seeing how strange Disney is. And I do remember kind of coming out of it and feeling how totally weird some of the rides really were, and just how strange. I kind of like this undersea ride, but It's a Small World was always very disturbing, and I think other people have mentioned that too. I don't know if there were subliminals, if there were, drugs they were putting in the air. I'm just getting wild tonight, you guys. I don't care. And so another thing that was going on at that time, it's interesting just to kind of go back to 1965 LA and so what if I'm told everything's good and, I'm babysat by Charles Manson, right? If you've seen my other movie, although he was like, okay, babysitter, if that indeed was him, but, you're sort of left not able to defend yourself because you've had the little me bred out of you, the little me maybe being the primal brain that defends yourself. And I have felt in my life a lot of times of getting sort of shut down or shutting myself down. And so that's been very weird. Another thing that happened in LA, if you can put up with this anymore, was that my parents sent me to a hypnotist. I think I had like a blanket. I might have been sucking my thumb a lot. I was 5. We were living there. I don't think it had to do with my asthma at all. I have heard about people with hypnosis and asthma, but I really don't feel that it had to do with that. They were kind of upset about some kind of little behaviors like that, and I wasn't able to find him. I typed in like 1960s hypnotist, and he was older. He was maybe the closest I found so far was maybe like this guy. He was, way older, but he was older than this even, and maybe this was him, before, I don't know, but he was older and bespectacled, and I believe he was in the Pasadena area, and he was in like an office building that was older where the doors kind of looked like a 40s, Humphrey Bogart movie where everything has like glass inside the doors. And I was taken to him on a lot of occasions, and he used the little watch back and forth, and he also would use visualization. He would tell me to close my eyes, and it was always the same thing, and that's, I think, why I can remember it after all these years, and it really struck me as odd. But he would tell me to close my eyes, and then he would say that I was on the beach and walking on the beach, and it was sunset, and I was walking with Barbie, and Barbie was my best friend. My Barbie doll had come to life, and we were holding hands, and we were walking on the beach. And I remember that always struck me as strange. Like, why would I want to walk on the beach with my Barbie doll come to life? It seemed so creepy. Like, why not say you're walking down the beach with your mom, your dad, your grandma, your grandpa? Like, why Barbie, right? And it's weird. And then I found out later Barbie was like invented in Germany and stuff. And I was like, why were they trying to put Barbie in my mind? What was the deal with this hypnotist, And he was like, who knows? Maybe he was even from Germany. I'm not sure. So, yeah, I know a lot of the mind control kind of came from the whole excuse me, Fu Manchu thing from, we had the concentration camp stuff in Germany, and we had the POW, Fu Manchu, Korean, Chinese, etc. stuff going on there. So LA was a weird time for me. That's also when I had that Bozo the Clown experience. It's weird. I just had typed in 1960s hypnosis. Here it is on Google. Hypnotist LA 1960s. And weirdly, that I Am a Man thing popped up, which is a nowadays thing that's at that kind of dopey, what is that dopey place? Washington State Employees Union, right? To make sure that the Washington State employees are, treated fairly and get enough walks and get enough cafeterias and get enough special banking and special waivers on fees and special deals on trips. And it's wild. I never told you about the bulletin board I found inside there. Like one of the times I snuck inside the inside part, and there's all kinds of weird things. Charter plane to Costa Rica, chartered for, state workers, you could go, wherever. Our new royalty, right? Yeah, so I've got this friend whose dad is a psychologist in Philadelphia, and his uncle is a well-known researcher for psychology in a department, I believe, at Duke or Notre Dame, one of those. And his uncle, my friend's name is Austin. And Austin told me that his uncle has two monkeys, or had at one time, two monkeys in the lab. He had all kinds of this creepy animal experimentation garbage going on. And he had named one of the monkeys after Austin. One was named Austin and the other one was named Lana. And they lived right next to each other in cages. And Austin was given nothing and beaten and tormented all the time. And Lana was given everything and loved all the time. And that really bothered Austin. The whole thing bothered him that was happening, and that his name was being used in it. And that his name was being used for the one that was suffering. So I don't know. We knew each other a long time, and I think one day I was telling him, he was talking about hypnosis and stuff, and asked if I'd ever gone or something. I don't know. People talk about funny things, right? Ouija boards, whatever. And I was like, I went to a hypnotist once, and I guess he just assumed I was an adult. He was like, did you go to quit smoking or something? And I was like, no, I went as a kid. And he freaked out. He was like, hypnosis is supposed to be for adults only. It can really mess with your brain. I don't know how it can. I think it's probably just something boring. You fall asleep. But I don't know. It was weird. He was saying that it's really dangerous or considered just maybe unethical to do it. I was sitting on the guy's lap, in a room alone. That would probably not, go over too well nowadays, right? But, it's just kind of what it was at the time. But it is weird to kind of be given this book that I felt at the time. It's not like I'm going back and going oh, check out this book, look how weird it is. Look at this split. It's hard to convey, but the feeling at the time of being forced to read it again and again was like my own little psychic driving. It was like my little spinning table. There were other things involved too, other factors, and I can try to bring them all up, but it's kind of hard to remember things. I remember when I remembered that book, and then when I found it on the computer, it was like, oh my God, it really did exist. Oh my God, there it is again, and yeah, wow, it looks just as menacing as before. So here we are, and yeah, I had this friend in the Chicago area. We lived outside of Chicago in the North Shore part, and she lived in this Tudor house. It was really, really old and really creepy, and it was different than all the other houses around in that it had a tree growing right up through the center of the house. I don't know if I can find that house here or not. It looked sort of similar to this one, and it was a huge tree. It had been growing since the 20s. It was kind of an older and darker house than this, and the inside, they only had one artist in their house, and it was copies of Hieronymus Bosch art all over the house. So all they had was this huge oak tree and this Hieronymus Bosch art, and the girl was a real stoner. All she did was like smoke tons of pot all the time, and sometimes she'd go off with this guy whose claim to fame was he was the little green sprout in the Green Giant commercials, and he would do something that was really awful, and thank God I never did it. I never got that wild, but it was something awful called angel dust, and thank God we never hear about it anymore. It was maybe sort of like the bath salt kind of thing of the 70s, and I think that now and then she would go too far, and her father was a top doctor. He was more than the top doctor. He was like the director of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, and they lived not too far from a park. I lived not too far from her, and there was this kind of, I think a lot of people didn't even know it was there. It wasn't really even a park. It was a forest preserve, and it was kind of on the tail end of an elementary school. And nobody went there except a few dog walkers, and that was it. And it was all trees. It was really lovely. Like I said, it wasn't really a park, and there was one little picnic table in the middle of all these trees. And so we would go for these wonderful walks and wind up there. And I had another friend who I would go with too, who was kind of better. This one was sort of naughty. But Kate, would... I believe that her father was a Mason. She would sometimes just get really, really stoned, and she would sometimes be maybe a little drunk too if I went to her house, and she would just start, kind of talking, and I didn't know if what she said was true or not, although it just seemed like, who would have that imagination even, right? But she said that her father told her that as a doctor, the first thing he would do with patients would be to stare at them in their eyes, and just stare at them. And then slowly, he said, he would look to the ground, keeping his eyes on them all the while, and slowly looking to the ground. Then he would come back up and look at the eye again, and go back down to the ground. And I believe there was something to do with timing. I don't know if you did it and got more rapid, or if you did it and got more slow. And I never tried this experiment myself, because first I just found it totally creepy. Like, oh my God, no wonder why I don't like to go to the doctor. After hearing this story, do all doctors mess with their patients? I've definitely had a few weird experiences. And so he would then do it a whole bunch. And she said that he told her it was something he had learned called aura stripping. And he had told her to do it in the halls at school, to maybe pick out a student, and every time she saw them, to do that, and to find a person holding books, and to do it to them every day, all the time, without them really knowing, that this is like gaslighting or gang stalking, right? That I'm hearing about in high school from another kid. I mean, my dad's a minister, for crying out loud. I didn't know about any of this, although who knows? I'd been subjected to a lot, so I shouldn't be like, I don't know nothing about MK Ultra, I don't know nothing. Me. But the goal was for her to make sure, and she's now an executive at CBS, by the way, and her goal was that he wanted her to do was to make someone drop their school books. That was her assignment from her father. And yes, he used to beat her and get really drunk, and the whole thing was creepy, and their house was beautiful and amazing, but I would only kind of be there during the day when he was gone, at the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, and it was quite the house to sort of partake in, if I may say so. And, where do we go from there, right? I mean, where on earth do we go from here? So there was one more thing. There were a couple more things I wanted to show you. This was also kind of going on in the neighborhood at that time, and that was Bob Shea, who had written along with Robert Anton Wilson. They were editors at Playboy magazine around that time, and this was the book that they wrote. And it's weird how now, everyone talks about the Illuminati, but in the 70s, I didn't remember anyone talking about it. And, reading it and just seeing, why is, what is the deal with the, the dollar bill and all of that? What on earth is going on, indeed? So I suppose we shall leave it at that, and we can wonder about the underground tunnels and bases at Disneyland.